The lower districts of New Korath never slept, but they breathed differently at night. Steam hissed from cracked pipes, casting ghostly shadows across the narrow alleys where the city's unwanted gathered. Neon signs flickered in languages from a dozen worlds, advertising pleasures and promises that most could never afford. This was where the broken ended up refugees, criminals, and those too strange for the upper levels to stomach. Vesa pressed herself deeper into the alcove between two crumbling buildings, her silvery blue skin barely visible in the dim light. At barely 4 feet tall, she could disappear into spaces others couldn't reach, a skill that had kept her alive for the past 8 months. Since her own people had finally decided she wasn't worth feeding, the Valdris were magnificent beings. Feet of elegant grace, with crystalline features that caught light and threw it back in brilliant displays. They were engineers, artists, diplomats. They built cities that floated on clouds and crafted technology that seemed like magic to lesser species. Everything about them was designed to inspire awe. Everything except Vesa. Her stomach cramped with hunger as she watched a food vendor across the narrow street. The alien proprietor, a thick-skinned Horvath, was cleaning his grill and preparing to close. Soon he would toss the scraps into the waste chute. And if she was quick enough, she might claim something before the automated cleaners arrived. A group of young Valdris passed by the vendor's stall, their bodies shimmering with health and confidence. They moved like dancers, every gesture flowing into the next with unconscious grace. One of them, a female with silver hair that seemed to hold starlight, laughed at something her companion said. The sound was like crystal bells, pure and beautiful. Vesa remembered making sounds like that once before the sneers started, before the whispers of defective and incomplete began following her everywhere she went, before her own birth mother had turned away in shame. Unable to explain why her daughter had stopped growing at half the proper height, the Valdris group paused near the food stall. The silver-haired female wrinkled her nose delicately. "This sector grows more disgusting each cycle," she said, her melodious voice carrying easily across the street. "Why the council allows such specimens to gather here is beyond comprehension." Her companion, a male with features that could have been carved from pure light, gestured dismissively. "Yes! The broken must go somewhere. Better here than contaminating the proper districts." "Still," the female continued, "one wonders if allowing the deformed ones to live at all serves any purpose. Natural selection should have taken its course long ago." Bess's breath caught in her throat. She knew they weren't speaking about her. Specifically, they couldn't see her hiding place, but the words hit their target anyway. In her people's language, the word they used for deformed was the same one they had branded her with since childhood, Threxty. The broken thing. The group moved on, their laughter fading into the general noise of the district. Vesa waited until she was certain they were gone before creeping toward the vendor's stall. The Horvath had already disappeared inside, leaving only the cooling grill and the promise of discarded food. She darted across the street, bare feet silent on the wet pavement. The waste chute was behind the stall, partially hidden by a stack of empty containers. She had done this dance dozens of times. Quick fingers. Quicker retreat never takes so much that anyone would notice. But as she reached for the chute's opening, a hand fell on her shoulder. "What do we have here?" Vesa spun, heart hammering. To find herself face to face with a human male. He was tall by her standards. Most species were, with brown hair and eyes that seemed older than his face suggested. His clothes were simple but clean, a dark jacket over plain trousers, the kind of outfit worn by clerks and low-level bureaucrats. Nothing threatening about him, but Vesa had learned not to trust appearances. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the district's machinery. "I was just looking for food," he finished quietly. His eyes took in her thin frame, the way her clothes hung loose on her small body, the hollow look that came from too many hungry days. "When did you last eat?" The question surprised her. Most beings who caught her scavenging either chased her away or demanded to know what she thought she was doing. None had ever asked about her well-being. Double quotes she started, then stopped. Truth was dangerous. Truth led to questions she couldn't answer without revealing what she was, and what she was made her a target. Yesterday, it was a lie. The last real meal she'd had was 3 days ago. Even that had been scraps begged from a sympathetic shopkeeper who had taken pity on her before his customers arrived. The human studied her face. She had the unsettling feeling that he could see straight through her deception. But instead of calling her out, he simply nodded. "Come with me," he said. Every instinct screamed at her to run. Tobias Marin had never intended to become someone who collected strays. His life was built on predictable routines. Wake at dawn, catalog planetary immigration records for 8 hours. Return to his modest apartment, read until sleep claimed him. It was a quiet existence that suited him perfectly. No complications. No emotional entanglements, no responsibilities beyond his own survival. Yet here he was. Finest delicacy in the galaxy. His apartment was Spartan by most standards, a single room with a sleeping alcove, small food preparation area, and walls lined with data tablets containing historical records. Everything had its place. Everything served a purpose. The girl Vesa, she had finally whispered when he'd asked, looked impossibly small sitting at his table, dwarfed by furniture sized for beings twice her height. "Why did you help me?" she asked between careful spoonfuls, her violet eyes never leaving his face. She ate slowly, as if expecting the food to be snatched away at any moment. Tobias considered the question while pouring himself a cup of synth coffee. The honest answer was that he didn't know. Something about finding her in that alley had struck him like a physical blow, the sight of someone so obviously desperate, so clearly abandoned by whatever system should have protected her. "You looked hungry," he said finally. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was all he could offer. How could he explain that? In her small, hunched form he had seen an echo of his own isolation. That her obvious fear of discovery resonated with his own careful invisibility? Vesa studied him with those tooled eyes. "Humans don't usually notice my kind, not unless they want something." What would I want? She gestured at herself with bitter humor. "Some think we're exotic. Others believe our body parts have medicinal properties. Most just find us curious enough to cage." The casual way she spoke of such horrors made Tobias's stomach tighten. He had spent years cataloging the movement of species across New Korith, documenting the endless flow of refugees and immigrants, but the paperwork had insulated him from the reality of what drove people to leave their homes, what they endured once they arrived. "I'm not most people," he said quietly. "No," she agreed, tilting her head as she studied him. "You're not. You live alone, work alone, speak to no one unless required. You collect old stories about dead civilizations. Your neighbors don't know your name." Tobias blinked, surprised by her accuracy. "How do you... I watch people. It's how I stay alive." Vesa set down her spoon, the bowl now empty. "You're hiding too, just in a different way." The observation cut deeper than he expected. Yes, he was hiding from expectations, from the need to form connections that would inevitably disappoint or betray. After 38 years of careful solitude, he had perfected the art of being invisible in plain sight. "What are you hiding from?" he asked. Her expression shuddered immediately. Rain began pattering against the single window, filling the silence between them. Tobias watched as Vesa's gaze drifted to the sound, her small hands clenching unconsciously. There was more to her story. He could see it in the way she held herself, always ready to flee, always calculating escape. "Roots. You can stay tonight," he heard himself say. The couch converts to a sleeping surface. She stared at him as if he had spoken in an alien tongue. "Why?" "Because you need somewhere safe to sleep." "Nothing's safe." The words came out flat, matter of fact. "Not for things like me." "What things?" But she had already withdrawn, wrapping her arms around herself like armor. Whatever secrets she carried were locked away behind walls he couldn't breach with simple kindness. Tobias activated the sleeping surface and found a spare thermal blanket. Vesa watched his movements with the hypervigilance of prey, but she didn't flee. When he showed her the small hygiene alcove and offered her clean clothes and old tunic that would hang like a robe on her small frame, she accepted with whispered thanks. Later, as he lay in his own bed, listening to her restless breathing, Tobias wondered what he had gotten himself into. His ordered life had just acquired a variable he couldn't control or predict. Every rational part of his mind insisted this was a mistake, that helping her would only bring complications. He wasn't equipped to handle, but when he heard her quiet sob and the darkness quickly muffled, as if even grief was too dangerous to express, he knew he couldn't have made any other choice. Tomorrow, he would have to decide what came next. Tonight, for the first time in years, he wasn't alone. The clinic existed in the spaces between, wedged into a forgotten sublevel, where the city's blueprints showed only maintenance tunnels. Juno Blackwater had chosen the location precisely because it didn't officially exist. Here in the maze of forgotten corridors, beneath New Korath's industrial sector, she could practice medicine on those the upper world preferred to ignore. When Tobias arrived, carrying the unconscious Valdris girl, Juno didn't ask questions. Questions were luxuries she couldn't afford in her line of work. Instead, she simply gestured him toward the examination table and began gathering supplies. "Fever broke about an hour ago," Tobias explained, his voice tight with worry, "but she hasn't woken up since yesterday." Juno ran her scanner over the girl's small form, frowning at the readings. Malnutrition, dehydration, signs of chronic stress. Expected for someone living rough in the lower districts. But there was something else, something that made her pause. "She's not sick," Juno said finally. "Her body's shutting down." "What does that mean?" Juno set down her instruments and really looked at the girl for the first time. Valdris were notoriously difficult to treat. Their physiology was still poorly understood by most medical professionals. But Juno had learned things in the war that weren't taught in any academy. "It means she's dying," she said bluntly. "Not from disease or injury, from isolation." Tobias stepped closer to the table. "I don't understand." Valdris are empathically linked to their communities. They need that connection to survive, like humans need air. Juno pulled up a holographic display showing the girl's neural patterns. "See these readings? Our brain is essentially starving. Cut off from her people, her body is giving up. There has to be something you can do." Juno heard the desperation in his voice and recognized it. She had worn that same tone herself once, begging doctors to save someone she couldn't bear to lose. "There might be, but I need to know what happened to her first." Over the next hour, Tobias told her everything, finding Vesa in the alley, the careful way she spoke about her own people, the fear that never left her eyes. Juno listened without interruption, her trained mind cataloging symptoms and possibilities. "She's been exiled," Juno concluded. "Probably for some perceived defect. The Valdris have strict standards for what they consider acceptable. Can you help her?" Juno studied the unconscious girl, noting details she had missed before, a slight asymmetry. In her features that would be considered flawed by Valdris standards, the way her natural luminescence flickered weakly like a dying star. "Not in the way you mean," she admitted. "I can treat the physical symptoms, but the underlying cause, ... She shook her head. "She needs her people, or she needs something that can substitute for that connection." "What kind of something?" Before Juno could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the clinic. Emergency lighting bathed everything in harsh red as automated systems announced an incoming priority medical transport. Juno's blood went cold. She hadn't called for any transport. "We need to move her," she said, already beginning to disconnect. "Monitoring equipment now." "What's happening?" "Someone's tracked her here." Juno lifted Vesa's limp form, surprised by how light she was. "They're people who pay good money for exotic specimens, Valdris especially." They moved quickly through the clinic's back passages, Juno leading them deeper into the forgotten tunnels. Behind them, the sound of forced entry echoed through the corridors, boots on metal, harsh voices shouting orders. "This way," Juno whispered, guiding them into a maintenance shaft barely wide enough for two people. "There's a safe room about 50 meters ahead." As they crawled through the cramped space, Vesa stirred in Tobias's arms. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "Where, ... double quotes," she whispered. "Safe," Tobias murmured back. "You're safe." But even as he said it, the sound of pursuit grew closer. Whoever was hunting them had resources and determination. In the darkness of the tunnel, with an unconscious alien girl depending on them, safety felt like the cruelest lie of all. Juno's fingers found the hidden panel she had been searching for, and a section of the tunnel wall slid aside to reveal a small chamber lined with medical equipment and emergency supplies. They tumbled inside just as footsteps echoed in the passage behind them. "Dr. Blackwater," a voice called out, artificially amplified. "We know you're here. Surrender the specimen, and no one gets hurt." Juno's jaw tightened. She recognized that voice. Captain Dex Corvani's, a man who had made a career of hunting the desperate and forgotten. If he had found them, it meant someone with serious resources wanted Vesa badly enough to hire the best. In the dim light of the safe room, she met Tobias's eyes and saw her own determination reflected there. Whatever was happening, whatever. Forces were closing in around them. They had already crossed a line they couldn't uncross. The hunt had begun. Captain Dex Corvanus had built his reputation on 3 principles: overwhelming force, meticulous planning, and the absolute certainty that every being had a price. In 15 years of enforcement work, he had never encountered a situation that couldn't be resolved through the proper application of these methods. Standing in the ruins of Juno Blackwater's clinic, surrounded by scattered medical equipment and the acrid smell of emergency purges, he was beginning to question that philosophy. "Sir," his lieutenant reported, "the tunnels branch in 17 different directions from this point. We could be searching for days." Corvani studied the tactical display projected from his wrist unit. The underground maze was more complex than their intelligence had suggested, a warren of forgotten passages that predated the current city structure. Perfect hiding places for someone who knew how to use them. "What do we know about the doctor?" he asked. Juno Blackwater, age 42. Former military medic with the Outer Rim Defense Force. Discharged 8 years ago following an incident on Kepler Station. Since then, she's been operating unlicensed medical facilities in various undercity locations. Corvanus nodded grimly. Military training explained why she had vanished so efficiently. But everyone had weaknesses, patterns that could be exploited. And the civilian, Tobias Marin, planetary records clerk. No military service, no criminal history, model citizen by all accounts. Then why is he helping them? The lieutenant had no answer for that. Corvanus dismissed him and activated his private communication array. The client who had hired him for this job paid extremely well for results, and they had been very specific about wanting the Valdris girl alive and unharmed. "Status report," came the synthesized voice through his encrypted channel. "The targets have gone to ground. We're initiating a grid search of the tunnel system. Time is becoming a factor, Captain. Our intelligence suggests others may be moving to claim the prize." Corvanis felt his jaw tighten. Competition complicated everything. What others? Unknown parties with significant resources? Possibly off-world interests. That changed the equation entirely. If there were other hunters in play, his carefully planned containment strategy would need to be abandoned in favor of speed and aggression. "I need more men," he said. "Already en route. You'll have a full tactical squad within the hour." The communication ended, leaving Corvanis alone with his thoughts and the growing certainty that this job was becoming more complex than anyone had anticipated. Whatever made the small Valdris girl so valuable, it was worth enough to spark a bidding war among some very dangerous people miles away. In the cramped safe room, Vesa was finally beginning to show signs of real consciousness. Her eyes tracked movement, and when Juno offered her water, she managed to drink without assistance. "Do you feel?" Tobias asked, crouching beside the narrow cot where she lay. "Different," she whispered. Her voice was stronger than it had been, but there was confusion in her expression. "Something's changed." Juno checked her readings again, frowning at what she saw. "Your neural patterns are stabilizing. The empathic feedback loop that was killing you, it's resolving itself somehow. I don't understand. Neither do I." Juno glanced at Tobias, then back at her patient. "Theoretically, prolonged contact with non-Valdris, who showed genuine care and acceptance could create substitute neural pathways. But the medical literature says it takes months or years to establish that kind of connection. Vessa's gaze moved. Between them, something flickering in her violet eyes. You both stayed with me, even when it was dangerous. Of course we did, Tobias said simply. No, she replied. Not of course. My own people didn't stay. They declared me Threxty Broken Hand. Cast me out to die. But you're not even my species, and you risked everything. Above them, the sound of searching grew closer. Heavy footsteps in the main tunnels, voices coordinating search patterns. Whoever was hunting them had brought reinforcements. They're getting closer, Juno observed, checking her weapons. We can't stay here much longer. Struggled to sit up, her small hands clenching into fists. They're hunting me because of what I am. What you are isn't broken, Tobias said firmly. Whatever your people told you, they were wrong. For the first time since he had found her, Vessa's expression shifted toward something that might have been hope. But before she could respond, the walls around them began to vibrate with the sound of heavy machinery. Tunnel borers, Juno breathed. They're not just searching anymore. They're coming straight through. The hunt was about to become a siege. And in the growing thunder of approaching engines, all three of them understood that running was no longer an option. Whatever came next would require them to stand and fight or surrender everything they had fought to protect. In the darkness of the underground, as the sound of pursuit grew to a roar, an unlikely family prepared to face forces that could destroy them all. The tunnel borer broke through the safe room wall in a shower of sparks and debris. Through the smoking breach came armed figures in tactical gear, their movements precise and coordinated. But instead of the expected capture team, the lead figure raised an empty hand in a gesture of peace. I am not here to harm you, the newcomer said, her voice carrying the crystal-clear tones of a Valdris. But unlike any Valdris Vessa had ever seen, this one was ancient, her silver skin marked with intricate patterns that seemed to shift in the dim light. Her eyes holding depths that spoke of centuries rather than decades. Juno's weapon never wavered. Another collector? I am Nyx of the First Circle, the elder replied, ignoring the threat. And I've been searching for this child longer than you have been alive. Vessa stared at the ancient being, something stirring in her memory. Stories whispered in her earliest years, before the shame and rejection had begun to list of Valdris, who had been different, special, dangerous enough to be hidden away or exiled entirely. Your mythics, Vessa whispered, using the old word. The touched ones. Nyx's expression softened with something that might have been pride. As are you, little star. As are you. Before anyone could respond, the sound of Corvanus's forces reached them closer now, closing in on their position with methodical precision. The captain's voice echoed through the tunnels, enhanced by tactical amplifiers. Dr. Blackwater, Mr. Moran, you are harboring stolen property. Surrender the specimen, and you will not be prosecuted. Specimen, Nyx repeated, her tone sharp with disgust. They speak of you as though you were a curiosity to be collected. She turned to face Vessa directly. Child, do you know what you truly are? Broken, Vessa replied automatically. Too small, too weak, too evolved. Nyx's interruption cut through the litany of self-hatred like a blade. You are the next step in our species' development. The bridge between what we were and what we must become. She gestured, and the patterns on her skin began to glow with soft bioluminescence. As they did, Vessa felt something respond within her own body, a warmth spreading through her chest. A sense of connection she had never experienced. Before the gift you carry, Nyx continued, allows you to form empathic bonds across species barriers. Not just with other Valdris, but with any sentient being capable of genuine emotional connection. Her gaze moved to include Tobias and Juno. These two have already begun to anchor you. That is why you survived when you should have died. Vessa looked at her unlikely companions with new understanding. Steady comfort she felt in Tobias's presence. The protective instinct that had driven Juno to risk everything. These weren't just kindness. They were the first threads of something unprecedented. But that's impossible, Juno protested. Cross-species, empathic bonding doesn't exist. It doesn't exist yet, Nyx corrected, but it will. The universe is becoming smaller, more connected. Our species will need to learn to truly understand each other, or we will destroy ourselves in isolation and fear. The sound of approaching forces grew louder, but Nyx seemed unconcerned. She focused entirely on Vesa, her ancient eyes intense with purpose. Your people cast you out because they feared what you represented: change, evolution, the possibility that their rigid perfection might not be the final answer. But you are not broken, child. You are breaking barriers that have existed since the first species looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone. Vesa felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in her life, they weren't. Tears of shame. What do I do? You choose. Nyx replied simply. You can come with me. Join others like us who have learned to use these gifts in secret. Or you can stay with those who have already begun to love you for exactly what you are. The choice hung in the air like a held breath. Behind Nyx, her team waited silently. Beside Vesa, Tobias and Juno stood ready to fight impossible odds to protect her. And through the tunnels, Corvanus's forces closed in with weapons and restraints, and the absolute certainty that she was property to be claimed. Vesa looked at each of them and turned the ancient elder, offering her a place among her own kind. The quiet human who had saved her from despair, the fierce healer who had risked everything to keep her alive. In that moment, she finally understood what Nyx had been trying to tell her. She wasn't choosing between them. She was choosing to bridge them. I'm not going anywhere, she said, her voice stronger than it had ever been. We stay together. All of us. As if in response to her decision, the glow from Nyx's skin patterns intensified. And Vesa felt something shift in the air around them. The empathic bonds she had formed with Tobias and Juno suddenly blazed to life, visible as threads of light connecting their hearts. For the first time in galactic history, different species were truly completely united, and when Corvanes finally broke through their defenses, he found not a group of desperate fugitives, but something entirely new, a family bound not by blood or species, but by the revolutionary power of acceptance and love. The hunt was over. The future had begun. The end.